Well, hello there and good day, and thank you so much for joining me at Dystopian Report, the place where we talk about the nightmare world we found ourselves living in. I'm your host, Jesse Pullman, and today we're doing something new and different. Today we're talking about 10, count them, 10 dystopian news story threads that are ongoing into the new year. This isn't a top list where I'm starting with the least impactful and moving to the most. I did group some of them together based on the themes they have, and I was maybe intentional with my starting and ending point, but each of these are important, so no skipping them, okay? Okay. Now, I just want to get two obvious points out of the way. First, I'm not a psychic, lawyer, military official, computer scientist, or you name it. I'd like to think I'm not an idiot and I do my research, but this video is more summary than detail, and I might get some of the more technical things that I talk about wrong, including and especially if things change between drafting and production, as they did today. It's Christmas. I'm getting some recording time, so things have happened. We'll talk about that. But as always on this channel, I encourage you to do your own research, especially if something sounds off to you. I could be wrong about something. Double check me. Also, do considering digging deeper if I touch on something you've never heard of before. We've all not known something in our lives. We've all come across something new, and I hope you do in this video. And learning is important. So if you leave a constructive feedback comment, I'll be happy to engage and learn with you. Secondly, because there were two things, if you find these kind of videos interesting or helpful to your life in some way, please subscribe to the channel so you can get dystopian reports when I make them. There's no real set schedules because a lot of times these are reports on ongoing current events, but I do make videos. I've made 60 this year. 60 in 12 months. That's what, 5 a month? I think my math is correct. And yes, my promise that if we hit 100 subscribers by the end of the year, so we got about a week, is still valid. I will go through the headaches of figuring out how to screen grab from Netflix and make a classic dystopian review of Terminator 0. Side note, you might be getting one of Code Geass either way. I'm not finished with it yet. I don't quite know if it's a dystopian tale, but it's an amazing story, and I certainly wouldn't call it noble bright. It might be dystopian. It kind of depends on the last few episodes and what they do with the sequel series. With that said, let's dive into our first story and maybe hit the intro. Thread 1. The AI boom, or maybe bubble, will continue disrupting. Perhaps the most hyped up story of the past year has been the ascent of so-called artificial intelligence into various corners of society. If you use Google, or Microsoft, or Meta, or just about any modern internet product, you've probably come across some variant of AI tools. Much, but not all of this, comes in the form of a large language model, which, in extreme summation, are kind of fancy pick-the-next-word machine that uses mathematical algorithms trained on vast quantities of data to create appropriate outputs to inputted prompts. Many of these AIs take the form of allegedly generative tools, which can do things like take a text prompt and spit out a facsimile of an image that matches the prompt. Putting in something like, I don't know, make a picture of a Larry David dancing will get processed by the program which, assuming it knows what a picture is, knows who Larry David is, and knows what a dancing person looks like, will spit out an image almost like what you want. There's layers upon layers to how this technology can be dystopian. For example, if we can create pictures of a person doing a thing, well, it seems amusing at first, but it might be maliciously useful if, say, you want to run a disinformation campaign about someone you dislike. For example, there have been reports of school-age children using this technology to create what are called deep fakes of their classmates doing plainly disgusting things. It can whip up false evidence for a pittance. And yes, that's pretty gross. This is notwithstanding the fact that these AI tools were trained on datasets often acquired through illegal means, such as downloading and stripping out books, photographs, artworks, and videos, including those videos you might be wondering about, made by uncompensated and unconsenting individuals who had no say in the matter. For reference, I'm an author, and while I'm yet to catch any of my work making it into one of these machines, which maybe is an insult, I don't know, I've got friends whose books were in the Anthropic lawsuit database, so I'm a little biased. The supposed end goal of end goals here is to create an artificial general intelligence, sometimes abbreviated as AGI, which would be a supercomputer that's as smart as, if not smarter than, human beings. If you're a longtime fan of this channel, you'll know this is a giant Skynet reference. The primary theory seemed to be that if LLMs were made powerful enough, big enough, strong enough, enough computing power, enough data sets, they just sort of black hole themselves into superintelligence. As it is, there's little to no evidence of that happening. In fact, various AI tools are starting to reach parity with one another and a sort of pinnacle in what they can actively do. These tools are often ineffective, requiring rewrites and reconfigurations of their output. Computer code it spits out doesn't run right, or it tells people to eat rocks in one famous example of Google's AI, or its proposed email script gets things wrong. These tools are often intrusive into the user's experience, meaning that people are burning out on them fast. If these tools can't replace the workers that investors are betting on them to replace, then what's their real value? Do they even have a market? And if they can replace workers, what happens to those workers? Does some form of universal basic income seem in the cards to keep the freshly unemployed from starvation and riot? Somehow I doubt it. All of this combines to suggest that there's an economic bubble afoot. Tons of money has been borrowed to build massive data centers that are bad for the environment and probably not going to crack the AGI barrier anytime in the next decade. Either the technology will work and it will relieve many of their jobs with no backup plan in place, or it won't, and those borrowed billions will come due, collapsing the tech industry hard. Then there are privacy issues, such as who is reading all of this data that's generated and harvested? I know I said I wouldn't put any one story first in this video, but the more I wrote, the more this is maybe the biggest story going into 2026. As far as what can be done about it, I don't know. I do know it's making the price of computer parts, especially RAM and GPUs, extremely expensive, and that's a huge problem. I'd suggest you avoid AI products if possible, mainly because they prove to be highly inaccurate and prone to erroneous input. They're also pretty bad for the environment, which is a whole other topic we'll be discussing later. The environment, that is. AI gets a lot of attention for its water use, but the electricity generation needed to power it has led to entire communities, particularly ones with a lot of black or otherwise marginalized people, getting inundated with air pollution, such as Memphis being polluted by XAI. That's Twitter and Elon Musk, by the way. As far as what you can do about it, we already mentioned trying to just not use these things, but the biggest thread you're going to find with all of these story threads is that we need you to be as loud about your opinions as possible and to make sure that your elected leadership knows about that. Why, yes, that might be foreshadowing. Thread 2. Tech freedom is endangered, both at home and abroad. Let's keep to the theme of technological terrors. One of the things we've been slacking on with this entire channel's project is talking about online censorship laws. I know I've written about the Kids Online Safety Act, known as KOSA, for my old Substack, but since Substack is a Nazi bar, we don't link to that anymore. KOSA isn't the only threat to online freedoms, but it's worth starting with. The idea is that KOSA would allow the government to section off online speech deemed dangerous to children. One of its leading sponsors is fascist Senator Marsha Blackburn, who has said that this law, which again is theoretically supposed to protect children from online dangers, could be used to censor not just queer voices, which might so-called harm children, but even censor black and indigenous voices because learning about accurate history might, again, so-called harm white children. I could see this being used to restrict information about sexual education and abortion, as that might also cause so-called, say it with me, harm. KOSA isn't the only threat to online freedom in the US, however. Of note is a now bipartisan effort to repeal a thing called Section 230 as a shorthand. It's part of a sequence of laws pertaining to telecommunications dating back to the 1930s, but updated in the 1990s. Section 230, C1, I don't know if those are like paragraph, section, whatever, I'm not a lawyer, states, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Later aspects of Section 230 provide a Good Samaritan-style protection against civil liability, read that wrong, for operators of interactive platforms. What this basically means is that, say, YouTube can't be held civilly liable for something I post on YouTube, like this video. Sure, YouTube has certain moderation requirements to protect against illegal materials, including such things as copyright protection and child exploitation materials, but if I were to say something which could get me in legal hot water, YouTube can't be dragged into it. Taking away Section 230's protections would essentially strip platforms of the protections that enable most forms of user-submitted content to be hosted by large distributors like YouTube, Blue Sky, Reddit, or your favorite social media of choice. There are other complications too. For example, Mississippi's law HB 1126 requires age verification to access certain kinds of social material and other online resources. This is similar to laws passed in the UK and Australia, which also have implemented online so-called child protecting laws, which require various forms of supposed proof that a user is old enough to access content. These laws are all flawed, requiring the collection of user data which could easily, and has been, be accessed by people with malicious intent, legally or not. Lastly, as we talked about earlier this year, payment processors perplexingly perched on moral soapboxes are being pressured into refusing transactions on materials they view as inappropriate. I actually nailed that on the first try. This has hit the video game publishing world especially hard, with Steam and itch.io both having emergency situations where creators on that platform are screwed over. As an author, Itch is a very popular author publication platform, but with this issue, it's hard to know if you'll get paid if your material is controversial. Right now, the biggest thing you can do about this is call your senators, especially if they're Democrats who might be waffling, and demand that they protect the free internet by voting against ill-thought-out changes to Section 230, COSA, and other laws. The filibuster is a bad thing in general, but if it's going to exist, these are the kind of laws that exist to prevent from being enacted. And the Senate, well, it needs 60 votes in order to get past the filibuster to make these changes. You need 60 votes in order to have a vote on the thing. That's majority rules. That's how the filibuster works, by the way. We're going to touch on that again later. Thread 3. The U.S. military buildup threatening Venezuela and Latin America. So, for those of you who live under a rock, which, I don't know, might be most of this project's fans, the U.S. Navy has built a substantial force around Venezuela. We've been bombing alleged drug smuggling boats without evidence being presented that they're drug smuggling, as well as without convictions for crimes, none of which carry the death penalty. That's pretty bad and sounds like a grievous violation of U.S. as well as international law. In the meantime, we've seized 2 oil tankers of disputed sanction status, and at the time of filming, we're pursuing a third in an active chase. This proves we could interdict these alleged drug boats if we wanted, but our military's leadership would rather just kill people, I guess. As far as Venezuela itself, it's a country roughly 1.5 times the size of Ukraine, being, and I might get these numbers wrong as I read them, I'm just reading numbers and they're hard to read sometimes, 353,831 square miles compared to Ukraine's 233,062 square miles. Ukraine, meanwhile, has about 31 million people, while Venezuela has roughly 28.5 million. Some estimates are a little higher. The reason for the comparison is simple. The U.S. attempting some sort of land invasion to oust Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro would be insane unless substantial internal collusion were achieved. Unless intel was precise enough to lead to a precision bomb strike on the guy, he could retreat to the jungle and wage a partisan war against whatever puppet government the U.S. installed. All of this pressure is allegedly to get Maduro to flee his country, or perhaps instigate a revolution against him by his people. The Trump regime has mentioned several reasons why they're doing this, including the good old golden standby oil, but some reporting has painted this as the first step of a larger grand strategy to topple other less America-friendly regimes in the area, such as Colombia and notably in secret Secretary of State Marco Rubio's reported thinking, Cuba. It's worth noting that a number of elections in Latin America have been trending conservative, and I'm using conservative very broadly here. Most notable of these is Argentina's Javier Milei, whose government just secured a strange $40 billion with a B bailout package from the U.S. government. In Chile, Jose Antonio Cast won despite his support of the Pinochet dictatorship. He was a big fan of Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, who in turn was good pals with Donald Trump. In Honduras, after the United States threatened to reduce foreign aid if he wasn't elected, Nasri Asfora was announced the winner of a disputed and extremely close election. These were all natural allies for the Trump regime, and it gives all the Madrid Charter vibes, which is an area I need to research more. The endgame to all of this, however, is murky. Even if U.S. goals are met, and Venezuela becomes a capitalist pseudo-democracy propped up by the might of the American military, and even if regimes allied to Maduro started to collapse and without Venezuela's oil output to float their economies, we'd still likely find ourselves in some sort of forever war against an enemy who would probably be able to wipe the Trump regime out. My personal read of this, supported by my pretty minimal understanding of recent national security strategy documents, including the so-called Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, is that Donald Trump is consolidating as much control as possible over the entire Western Hemisphere. This might be coupled with further breaks from the rest of the world, such as selling out Ukraine, but I'm still confused where they think they're going, unless they expect China and Russia to be parties to some sort of sphere of influence trading. And who knows, maybe that's exactly what they're thinking. We give Russia Ukraine, we give China Taiwan, and we get to keep Latin America. Doesn't seem like a fair deal. Doesn't seem like a fair deal to the people being traded, but whatever. And in case you're wondering, yes, military authorization is supposed to come from Congress. But since Republicans dominate Congress, the Democrats have been positioned in such a way as to have to attempt to proactively restrain the Trump regime. Thus far, Republicans have steadfastly voted against any restrictions of force. That's not authorization to use force necessarily. It's actually kind of worse than that because it means Congress is simply surrendering its power. When it comes to things we can do about this, the best thing to do is to be prepared to protest against military involvement and to insist that political candidates running for office make the prosecution of war crimes a key part of their platform, along with the ending of authorizations for the use of military force. I know some of those are being scaled back, but those are like war of terror ones and not Venezuela ones. So we need to make clear that Congress controls the power to declare war, not the president. And if that means overturning the War Powers Act, hey, we could do that. Foreign conflicts will be used to normalize bad American behaviors. The war in Ukraine is an ongoing atrocity where an allied nation of ours is fighting for the survival of its people and its territorial integrity. This isn't news. This has been going on since February 2022. The war has mostly been a stalemated meat grinder, at least lately, where soldiers and civilians alike are targets for the Russian war machine, though the Trump regime has lately made moves to try to sell our ally Ukraine out to the Russian dictatorship. The Israeli conquest of Palestine is a matching mate for the Ukrainian conflict, with the Israeli government just recently parceling out over 10 new settlement locations in Palestinian territory. Gaza in particular is constantly being slaughtered, the West Bank is being carved up, and there's talk of Israel trying to get permission from the U.S. to bomb alleged Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, or Iranian targets, or whoever they damn well feel like bombing at a given time. What will happen to people in the crossfire? Israel certainly does not care. Their death just means less people to forcibly relocate. Other wars are taking place in the world too. For a while now, there's been discussion of U.S. action in the African nation of Nigeria on grounds that Christians are being persecuted there. There's some grains of truth with that, but those conflicts aren't simplistic persecutions of Christians so much as they are battles between farmers and herders competing over limited resources, the kind of limited resources that the U.S. government withdrew when it slashed U.S. aid, for example. Now, today's Christmas. I'm recording this the day of. Just a few hours ago, because of course it's Christmas, Donald Trump's tough talk turned into action as the regime bombed alleged ISIS targets in Nigeria, allegedly at the request of Nigeria's government. Supposedly, their government asked us to help them. This is all breaking news. We're not sure. By the time you watch this, you might know more than I do. To say the least, a pro-Christian bombing campaign launching on Christmas is certainly on the nose. Even if the operation was really at Nigeria's discretion, we don't know. There's also a massive civil war in Sudan, where slaughters by pretty much all combatants have taken place. We haven't heard too much about that, mainly because it's on the relative periphery from American political consciousness. It doesn't really involve oil assets like Venezuela, our allies like Ukraine, our client states like Israel, or even just our largest religious demographic of Christians. These are Africans killing Africans, so from the perspective of much of the Western world, it's viewed as not our problem. That's wrong, but it's viewed as not our problem. Never mind that our allies' weapons seem to find their way into combatant weapons caches all the time. We see you, UAE to RSF pipeline. The slaughter at the city of El Fashir in particular attracted some international attention, but not enough to have prevented it or to have stopped the war. These and many other conflicts will not only continue, but new ones may open. Thailand and Cambodia are exchanging gunfire, for example. It hasn't blown up into a full-fledged war, at least not that I'm aware of. Again, periphery. Not our best friends, not our most valuable resources, so kind of not focused on in our media. Maybe an area for you to dig deeper into if you're interested. Depending on how these go, they may be used to justify American involvement in all sorts of nefarious ways. Trump recently bombed Nigeria, for example. Alternatively, Trump may take a "look what's going on there, that's bad, we're not doing that, so we must be the good guys" argument when he's either flat out lying or possibly just understating the gravity of whatever it is we are doing. if they commit genocide, we can commit oppression, that sort of thing. In short, so long as we stay on the so-called better side of the atrocity tally, the Trump regime will treat atrocities as acceptable and expect compliance. The biggest thing you can do about this is just be aware of what's going on and speak out in support of the defenseless. We've talked about truth and reconciliation commissions before on this channel, and we'll need them to hold our current administrators responsible for whatever crimes against humanity they commit. Push for politicians who will be on board with enacting consequences, and support the International Criminal Court in its investigations. Thread 5. Trump's deportation and concentration camp scheme will continue. Sticking with the atrocities, I see. We recently did a story, Dystopian Report 60, which featured in part the spiking of a 60-minute story about the Secot concentration camp America has been leasing from El Salvador's dictator and sending alleged migrants to. Destinations like that, and like the infamous so-called alligator Alcatraz, are the endpoints of a horrific process which is taking place in American communities large and small all across the nation that we've been covering closely on this channel. It begins with immigration raids by ICE, which we've talked about multiple times on this channel. Often warrantless, often without clear goals, and with court arguments amounting to, paraphrased, we can detain them if we think they're Hispanic. Yes, they've kind of made that argument in court. People of all citizenship statuses are detained in what are now called Kavanaugh stops, sometimes for minutes and sometimes for hours or days, as their citizenship status is haphazardly and often inaccurately checked. Sometimes these stops are on the street, and other times they are courthouses where people have dates in front of judges. You know, in case you were concerned they were criminals. They're at court. Weird. Citizens are typically released relatively briskly, but many with legal residence permission, like green cards, are detained for even longer, and undocumented immigrants are almost certain to be disappeared. The regime will argue that they are taking drastic steps to protect Americans from dangerous criminals. Again, we arrest a lot of these people at court for their court dates on their immigration hearings. So we know the reality is these raids are not targeted at criminals. We know this because they have dismissed the value of such documents as real ID and instead made a computer facial scan a defining test of legal residency. Remember what we said about AI accessing data and the people legally or illegally accessing data to harm people? This is that. We've talked about Peter Thiel on this channel before, and this lines up with Palantir's data collection efforts big time. Once detained, these people are held in horrific conditions. Overcrowded cells, no food or drink, no sanitary products or places to use the bathroom, no medication, no heating, no cooling, no contact with the outside world, including, in a lot of cases, not being allowed to contact a lawyer to represent them. That covers most of the due process amendments being violated. At best, they are released after a period of detention. At worst, they are literally disappeared to foreign or domestic concentration camps where they are tortured. This was covered by many news outlets, including 60 Minutes' segment on it, which CBS News chief Barry Weiss suppressed to the regime's brief benefit. She'd apparently never heard of the Streisand effect because it aired in Canada and a lot of people saw it who otherwise normally wouldn't have tuned in. As far as what's being done, on-the-ground protests have proven at least occasionally successful at preventing ICE from mobilizing effectively. Early warning apps such as IceBlock have emerged, and community safety networks have been able to obtain early warnings of raids to help at-risk people escape detention. Sometimes entire raids have been canceled because of citizen blockades of ICE facilities and resources. Moreover, when it comes to the next round of elections, you can make sure and make clear that you will only vote for candidates who will abolish, not reform, abolish ICE and hold its Gestapo foot soldiers to account for violating laws. Thread 6. Trump will continue to try to militarize the nation. So as you no doubt know from our reporting on the topic, the Trump regime has made a concerted effort to deploy National Guard and other troops in American cities. They've done California, they've done Chicago, they've done Memphis, they've done DC, and they'll do others. There's varying excuses from high crime rates to a need to protect ICE to what have you. These deployments have been heavily challenged in court, with the recent Supreme Court ruling stating Trump could not deploy certain assets to Chicago, but with that not at all settling the issue in many other deployments, including one SCOTUS has ruled more favorably towards. This goes above and beyond the mass mobilization of ICE, though ICE has certainly been given the resources of a major nation military. This involves taking U.S. service people off their normal duties and deploying them to essentially stand in as police and support. The term I'd like to introduce you to, or remind you of, is Imperial Boomerang. It's the idea that various illegal and policing and military techniques enacted in the periphery or outside of an empire, especially the unsavory ones, will eventually be deployed at home against civilians. Now, because the U.S. military is an all-volunteer service made up mostly of reasonable people who are citizen soldiers and all that, I don't predict them somehow coming in and being the absolute worst of the worst part of the Trump regime. That's probably the ICE who these troops are often employed as bodyguards for. ICE is the real heavy part of that imperial boomerang, but having military-level support makes ICE much less tempting to challenge. No, instead we have to look at things like the DC attack on 2 National Guard soldiers, which left 1 dead and 1 seriously wounded. That was a tragedy which never should have happened. They never should have been there. A court had ruled that they shouldn't be there, but then put that ruling on hold. Then the attack happened. So their lives were fed to Trump's ego. We have the further possibility of a legitimate mistake escalating a given future scenario, such as the accidental discharge of a firearm instigating a panic or wounding someone or killing someone. Accidents happen. These are people with guns. This is dangerous and not to be toyed with. And yet the Trump regime is toying with it. As nightmarish as it has been at times, we've seen some truly inspirational characters popping up throughout the year. I'm still partial to the Witches Against White Supremacy movement from 2020, seeing as I'm one of them. But this year we saw the redemption of the cartoon frog as part of a movement of protesters facing off against ICE and the National Guard and local police in blow-up costumes of various characters. This created a contrast between the heavily militarized and brutal police apparatus assaulting protesters and the protesters who are just people wearing costumes. As always, one thing you could do about this is to demand that any politician you choose to vote for must insist on impeaching Trump, Pete Hegseth, and anyone else involved in the charade. Also, there's definitely going to have to be more No Kings days, though I feel we need more action than just that. We need No Kings boycotts of those companies and businesses which support this regime. Thread 7. The Epstein files will continue to wreak havoc. There goes my monetization. There goes my algorithmic presence. Look, I don't really feel like I need to say much about this one, but there are a few things more dystopian than an island base for a child sex abuse ring consisting of the ultra-wealthy and ultra-powerful. By now, we all know who Jeffrey Epstein was. We know what he and his accomplices, both known and unknown, in general did. And we know that there are laws on the books now requiring the disclosure of all files related to his crimes. The Epstein Files Transparency Act law states that the only redactions to the files should be of victims of ongoing cases and of actual images of crimes taking place. Basically, it's a bare minimum situation where the public should be getting as much information as possible and the redaction should be kept to the bare minimum. And what's transpired? Pages of fully redacted documents, the vast majority of which were not released by the legally mandated release date. Redactions so heavy that it's obvious the guidelines weren't followed. And how can we confirm this? Well, some of these redactions were done incorrectly. Savvy document perusers have figured out ways to circumvent the redactions, discovering that the text was still present, essentially underneath the censor bars placed over them. All you had to do was highlight the blacked out text, hit the copy button, and paste it. A quick copy paste later, and a lot of the documents were unredacted, proving it's a charade. So that's one way they fucked up. Another way they fucked up was that after a massive document dump started being dug through, certain images, including one of Donald Trump with a number of young-looking women, or girls perhaps, were suddenly pulled down and out of circulation. The claim is that these images actually required redactions and weren't redacted during the first pass. So what does that mean? That someone in the images was a victim, right? Interesting. I wonder which picture in the stack was violating that criteria. Could have been any of them. Could have been a specific one. It's one I'm thinking of. You can look it up. Even as I was revising this for final draft on December 24th, a DOJ announcement revealed they'd uncovered 1 million with an M new files that they need to go through. 1 million. From the department whose boss, Pam Bondi, once said there were no such files. With many more documents to be released, with the legitimacy of some drawn into question, And with the law's bipartisan co-sponsorship duo of Republican Thomas Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna calling for criminal and impeachment consequences for Attorney General Pam Bondi, this story is going to continue wreaking havoc into 2026. In this case, there isn't too much to do, other than to keep an open but skeptical mind. You will see attempts at distractions and misdirections, such as the insertion into the Epstein files of a known AI deepfake of Epstein's alleged final moments. But they weren't really his final moments because it wasn't a real video. And you, as good as you are at noticing these sort of things, might not see exactly what you expect coming out. But I'd add that making the impeachment and or inherent contempt of Pam Bondi a demand for anyone you'd consider voting for isn't a bad idea. I'd also add that you should be demanding that anyone implicated in crimes should be punished in some way, shape, or form. Statutes of limitation may make this difficult depending on state laws, but efforts must still be made, and obstruction, if I'm not mistaken, does extend the amount of time that statute of limitations apply. In other words, if the statute of limitations is 4 years, but you covered up for 6 years, that 4-year clock starts once it's uncovered because you've obstructed justice. So get out there and let those people know what you want and that you want consequences. Thread 8. Healthcare will be expensive, as will other things. So let's open with an acknowledgement that everything is more expensive these days than it used to be. This is a multi-tiered situation having to do with all sides of the economic coin. Supplies are reduced due to international conflicts. Supplies are reduced due to tariffs, aka import taxes, on goods. Supplies are reduced due to environmental problems. Demand for electricity and water is up for those data centers we mentioned earlier in this video. Demand for some imported goods might be relatively stagnant, but with tariffs, those supplies are diminished, so costs are going up. Demand might not change, but the prices charged might be increased so that a producer's profits can be increased, sometimes claiming it's to pay for a tariff. You get the picture. But I want to zero in on healthcare because it was the topic of a major political fight in 2025. Unless an unthinkable miracle happens, the Affordable Care Act's tax credit subsidies will end about a week from when I'm writing this. That means almost everyone's healthcare will be more expensive. Mine is estimated to double for what it's worth, and I've got one of the cheapest plans. But I've heard people report that theirs are quadrupling. That's not uncommon, with some people being pushed into a different type of coverage altogether. This means millions are weighing whether or not they can continue paying for insurance. The trick to this is, when a massive chunk of people remove themselves from the proverbial risk pool, that means costs go up even more for everyone left in. Even if just healthy people take themselves out of the insurance market, well, those healthy people were the most likely to pay their premiums while using the least amount of resources in return for those premiums. The sickest and most injured among us will pay higher prices, unless we mathematically can't, because we absolutely need to be covered. But since we use more resources, we effectively cost more to insure. That means prices have to go up even more to match. This is what the Democratic Party, or should I say, most of the Democratic Party, was fighting against when the Senate forced a month and change long shutdown. While it's true that many senators and even some House members, including my own, sold people out in the end in exchange for the promise of a vote which never took place as it was filibustered, the aftermath may still lead to some kind of deal being struck to fix at least the worst of this. I just have one doubt. I have a bit of a theory in my head about how Republicans plan to deal with this whole situation. While there is indeed a discharge petition to hold a majority rules vote in the House on re-implementing the subsidies, the Senate has already voted against even having a vote on the topic. Instead, I expect Republicans will pull a stunt where they use the 2026 budget reconciliation process to attempt to force through a healthcare overhaul of some kind. If that sounds familiar, it's because this was a repeal and replace playbook from Trump's first term. What can be done about this? Well, in 2026, there's an election we're saving for our last topic. And in that election, you can demand that you will only vote for a candidate who will revolutionize our healthcare system in a good way. I'm personally a believer in Medicare for all, but I'm not dogmatic for a specific system so much as I am demanding that some form of national single-payer healthcare system be implemented. I also want to note that the regime is slashing Veterans Affairs healthcare resources, specifically targeting those who have risked their lives for this country. And this problem could also be solved by Medicare for all. I've written about this before on that Substack that we don't link to anymore, but we pay more for healthcare per capita in the United States than any other nation on Earth. And we have worse outcomes than our peer nations who do have nationalized healthcare. It's time for a change. Thread 9. Climate change will continue wreaking havoc. You know Tehran, the capital city of Iran? Yeah, in recent months it's begun running out of water. It's to the point where Iran is talking about at least a partial evacuation of the city. Do you know Washington State? Have you heard about all the recent flooding it's gotten? From what I'm told by those who know better about this area than I do, many of these storms, strength-wise, are perfectly normal storms for this time of year. It's just that the temperature was too high, and it fell as rain, which is all really quick, as compared to snow, which settles in and develops snowpack. Have you heard of Jamaica, the country? It just recently had one of the worst hurricanes in history hit it. They had an insurance payout, if I'm not mistaken, because they took out insurance just in case this happened. They gambled, and unfortunately, they won. The truth is that our global climate is changing. The cause is beyond dispute. It's human geoengineering via the burning of carbon-based fuels. There are numerous technologies which exist that could, in unison, not in one of these, but in unison, all but eliminate the burning of these carbon-based fuels. For example, solar power with battery backup can supply most residential needs most of the time, with many nations having days where solar is 100% of their power output. This is still a very rare thing, but it does happen. You'll hear France had full output. You'll hear California had full output. You'll hear Costa Rica had full output. Wind power can pick up the slack if it's a dark and stormy day, because if it's dark and stormy out, you're not getting the sunlight, but you're getting the wind. So the wind power picks up. Modern nuclear power is promising, and something I'm really interested in, like liquid fluoride thorium reactors, but it's underinvested in and hasn't really gotten a lot of attention paid to it because of semi-legitimate fears of nuclear power. Instead of embarking on this new technological path, the Trump regime is about to start a war with Venezuela for oil rights, and is actively shutting down offshore wind programs under allegations that they interfere with our national security and radar defense. That's after they lost a court battle. They came up with a new reason. And while nuclear is under consideration here and there, the biggest news about it is that 3 Mile Island, remember that? The big nuclear scare thing? That's being restarted to feed a Microsoft data center. Meanwhile, Trump is ordering the shutdown of facilities like the National Climate Research Lab in Colorado. All that to say, things will probably not turn a magical corner in 2026, and climate disasters should be baked into your calculus of things like, why are all these wars being fought? People need food and water and will often fight and kill others to get it. In case you're wondering what to do about this, this is where we demand a massive investment in green energy. This likely should take the form of a Green New Deal, where the investment in green energy gets to double as a jobs creation program, but that's another story. Unless your 2026 candidate is serious about revolutionizing our environmental care policies, they aren't prepared for the challenges that we face and should probably not be your 2026 candidate. Now, just in case you're asking why I am always stressing 2026 candidates, let's get into our final plot thread to follow. Thread 10. The 2026 midterms are coming and will be chaotic. Every 2 years, the House of Representatives and approximately 1/3 of the Senate are up for re-election, on top of local races that might or might not fall during this year. For example, New York State is having its governor election in 2026, but my current county, Nassau, had its executive election just a couple months ago in 2025. For what it's worth, Trump is not up for re-election in 2026. We're not talking about 2028 right now. This is where I am upfront and disclose my own political alignment for those who may have missed it elsewhere that I've put it. At the time of writing this, which is Christmas 2025, I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican, but rather a member of the Working Families Party. I'm strongly thinking of re-registering as a Democrat simply to vote in primaries, as it seems like my state will have some important ones this year, and particularly governor. I kind of like Antonio Delgado over Kathy Hochul. And that's my first piece of advice. Be involved in a primary. That means you have to go out and learn your state's laws, because every state has different deadlines and different requirements. Some states are open primary where you can just walk into a voting place, pick a party to vote for, and vote for somebody to be that party's nominee. Other states, you have to register months in advance to be allowed to vote in that party's primary. You have to be a member of that party. So, know your state laws, know what's up. Beyond that, who is to tell how these elections will go? The first question people are asking these days is, will there even be an election? My answer to that is to study the inertia of the situation. Judging from the mounting congressional retirement list, it seems like most people in power are expecting they will have to face their voters. While there have been occasional election shenanigans in 2025, these elections did happen, so it's fairly likely we will have them in 2026. Will they be free and fair? That's already kind of sunk. There's been a notorious widespread Republican effort to gerrymander states they govern. They seem to have succeeded in Texas, where the Supreme Court refused to strike down their maps, but they failed in Indiana, where the Republican-controlled Senate voted against changes to the map. For once in their lives, Democrats retaliated a little and gerrymandered some of their own states. But those were direct responses, and in California's case, in case you're curious, the people had a vote on how to organize their maps. They had a vote to change how they organize their maps. That's actually the best way to do it, is to have people participate directly. Kind of like a referendum, which is a good thing California does most of the time. So we're already kind of past the free and fair bridge, because the people's voice is already distorted, if not outright silenced, and many people are just being silenced. As for what the elections will hinge on, that's harder to predict because black swan events happen. The whole point of those is that they're unpredictable and they disturb the status quo. I don't think most Republicans are likely to run on promising to amend the Constitution and give Trump the right to run for a third term, but third term talk has certainly popped up in the comments of some videos on this channel, so maybe someone will. At the same time, while I provided a number of things in this video for you to demand, getting just one candidate to support all of them is most definitely what we would call an ask. Getting universal acknowledgement of these parts, all of these things we've talked about today, it's kind of naive, but that's also what primaries are for. I'm not saying you have to run for office yourself, although you could, but you should find someone you can support and vote for them, assuming the races that you're interested in do in fact have primaries. The Democratic Party is a broad strokes entity. This is complicated, and again, this is a summary video. This isn't in-depth. It is known to suppress primaries against unfavored candidates, or against their favored candidates by unfavored candidates, I should say. This can be overt, like refusing to let primary challengers speak at local meetings. I've heard of that happening. It could be as subtle as refusing to endorse Democrats who win primaries when they don't toe the party's line. See also Chuck Schumer. Also, there's a whole report on what went wrong in 2024 that the Democratic Party has decided it doesn't want to release. And that worries me because it doesn't make me believe they've learned any lessons from that. Anyway, primaries. Take part if you can. After that, it's up to you what you do. It's your vote. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to tell you that if you can get 90% of what you want, and 10% you can just kind of live with and suffer with, that's not too bad. If you're in a situation where that's inverted and you're suffering with 90% and only living with 10% of it, that's another situation, and that's what primaries are for, getting better candidates. Conclusion. And that's it. Those were 10 dystopian news threads that will spill over into at least early to mid 2026. Again, feel free to leave a constructive comment, maybe with something you've been keeping an eye on as we cross into 2026, and I'll be happy to engage with you. Leave a poorly written mean one, and I might just make fun of you. Otherwise, subscribing to the channel is the easiest thing you can do to help the channel grow, and it really does mean the world to me to see you out there. With that said, I want to extend a couple of quick acknowledgements. To my wife, Ariella, for always being by my side throughout what has been a very challenging year, both personally and politically. To Jamie Dimon for giving this review, feedback, and critique. Thanks to everyone who suggested I look into a story over the course of the year. Thanks to everyone who commented, left me a thought, left me a feedback, shared the videos, liked the videos, sent them to their friends. Adriana Lark, I see you. If you made it this far, I want to hear from you. And yeah, The last person I want to give a thought to isn't a person. It's a moment of contemplation for Ariel, the office cat, who I really wish could be here to meow at the microphone and headbutt me in the chest and provide us with her classic palate cleanser like she did at the start of the year. I really miss that cat, so let's have a quick moment of silence for her and I suppose for all those who have suffered over the course of this year as well. Thank you so much for joining me on Dystopian Report, the place where we talk about the nightmare world we have found ourselves living in. And as always on this channel, pieces.